My name is Grace Whitmore, and I've worked at the Cleo Rogers Memorial Library in Columbus, Indiana for 3 years. It's the only job I've ever loved. The building itself is a masterpiece, designed by I.M. Pei back in 1969. All red brick and geometric windows that catch the afternoon light just right. Most days I arrive at 7 a.m. to unlock the heavy glass doors and breathe in that particular smell of old paper and furniture polish that makes me feel like I'm home. Columbus isn't a big town, about 50,000 people, famous for our architecture more than anything else. We get tourists sometimes, taking photos of the Elio Saarinen Church or the Robert Venturi Fire Station. But mostly, the library serves locals. Mrs. Patricia Kemp brings her grandson Dylan every Tuesday for the toddler reading circle. Tom Vestry camps out in the reference section working on his perpetual novel about the Civil War. I know their faces, their routines, their favorite sections. Last week, the head librarian, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, called me into her office. She's worked here since 1983, before the renovation that added the computer lab. Her hands shook as she slid a laminated card across her desk. You need to read this, Grace. Memorize it. Don't ask me questions because I won't answer them. Just follow what it says. The card listed 5 rules. Simple things mostly. Don't reshelf books after 9 p.m. Never turn off the lights in the Indiana history section. If you hear children laughing on the second floor after closing, ignore it. At the time, I thought maybe she was losing it. Eleanor's 72. Maybe early dementia, I figured. Then yesterday, I found the children's section on the 3rd floor. That shouldn't be possible, because our library only has 2 floors, and the children's section has always been on the ground level, next to the circulation desk, where I can watch the kids. But when I went upstairs to reshelve some books on Hoosier history, there it was. The bright alphabet carpet, the little reading nook with the bean bags, even the mural of the cat in the hat that Susan Moreland painted in 2015. Everything was exactly the same, except for one thing. The children in that section weren't making any sound. 8 kids were up there sitting cross-legged with books open in their laps, but they weren't moving, weren't breathing. When I got closer, I realized they weren't the kids from our town. Their clothes were wrong, old-fashioned, like from the 1950s or something, and their skin had this weird waxy look, like department store mannequins. I tried to back out of the section, but when I turned around, the stairs were gone. Just a wall of bookshelves where the staircase had been. That's when one of the children turned her head toward me, real slow, and smiled. Her teeth were yellow and brown, and her eyes were black as oil. She whispered, "Story time is starting. You have to read to us now." The girl's mouth kept moving after she finished speaking, like she was chewing something. I could see her jaw working side to side, grinding, though no sound came out. The other 7 children still hadn't moved. Their books lay open to random pages, Where the Wild Things Are, Charlotte's Web, The Velveteen Rabbit. Classic stuff. But the pages looked brittle, yellowed at the edges like they'd been sitting in someone's attic for decades. My voice came out scratchy. I don't do story time. That's Susan's job. She handles the children's programming. The girl tilted her head. Not like a person considering my words, but like a bird examining a bug. Her neck bent at an angle. Susan isn't here. You are. Rule number 4 says the adult must read when story time begins. Rule number 4. Eleanor's laminated card hadn't mentioned anything about story time. I pulled it from my cardigan pocket with shaking fingers. 5 rules, just like I remembered. Never reshelf books in the Indiana history section after 9 p.m. If you hear children laughing on the 2nd floor after closing, do not investigate. The card catalog in the basement is for reference only. Never pull the drawers fully open. When story time begins, the adult must read until the children are satisfied. Always count the exits before your shift ends. My throat went dry. Rule 4. It was right there, and I'd skimmed past it this morning thinking it just meant our regular Tuesday afternoon sessions with the kids from Columbus East Elementary. "What book?" I asked. "What do you want me to read?" The girl reached beside her beanbag and held up a slim volume. The cover showed a simple illustration of a building engulfed in flames. The title read, "The Elmwood Fire, a Memorial," published 1953. I'd never seen that book before, and I'd cataloged every item in our children's collection. "Where did you get that?" "You have to read it." The girl's voice had changed. Flatter now. Less human. "We've been waiting so long. 68 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Behind her, the other children began to move. Just their heads at first, all turning in perfect synchronization to face me. One boy had a burn scar that covered half his face, the skin puckered and shiny. A girl with pigtails was missing her left ear, just a smooth patch of skin where it should have been. Another boy's hands were blackened, fingers fused together. The temperature in the room had dropped. I could see my breath now, small clouds forming with each exhale. The alphabet carpet beneath my feet felt spongy, wrong, like I was standing on something organic rather than synthetic fiber. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to go back downstairs. There are patrons who need help. Mrs. Kemp comes every Tuesday with Dylan and—" "It's Thursday," the girl interrupted, "and it's 3:47 p.m. Your shift doesn't end until 6. You have time." She was right about the day, but when I glanced at my watch, it showed 10:23 a.m. The second hand wasn't moving. I tapped the crystal. Nothing. The girl stood up in one fluid motion, no bending of knees or shifting of weight, just vertical, like someone had pulled her up with invisible strings. She held out the book. "Read to us. That's all we want. Just read our story." I took the book because I didn't know what else to do. The cover felt cold, like it had been stored in a freezer. When I opened it, the pages were handwritten. Someone's careful cursive filling every line. No printed text, no publisher information. Just page after page of blue ink testimony. Out loud, the girl said, "Start with chapter 1. The day everything changed." The other children began to hum, low and rhythmic, like a funeral dirge. The sound made my teeth ache. I looked at the wall of bookshelves where the stairs should have been, hoping maybe they'd reappeared. Still solid, still blocking my exit. I cleared my throat and began to read. On May 14th, 1952, the Elmwood Library in Marion County hosted its weekly afternoon story time. As soon as I spoke the date, all 8 children opened their mouths in silent screams. Their mouths stayed open, stretched wide enough that I could see down their throats. No tongues, no teeth past the front row. Just darkness going back and back, deeper than any human mouth should go. The humming stopped, replaced by a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel. But no air moved in the room. The beanbags didn't shift. The pages of the book in my hands stayed flat. I forced myself to keep reading. My voice sounded thin, reedy. The Elmwood Library served the farming communities east of Marion County. Head librarian Dorothy Brennan had organized the story time as part of a literacy initiative funded by the state. 9 children attended that day, ages 6 to 10. Their names were Margaret Yoder, age 8, Samuel Pruitt, age 7, Rebecca Finch, age 9. As I read each name, one of the children closed their mouth. Margaret first, the girl with pigtails and the missing ear. Her face smoothed out like someone had erased an expression from a chalkboard. Then Samuel, the boy with the fused fingers. One by one, they settled back onto the alphabet carpet, returning to their original positions with books in their laps. But there were only 8 children here. The book listed 9 names. I kept going, reading about how Dorothy Brennan had been a widow, how she'd fought the county board for 3 years to get funding for children's programs, how she believed reading could save kids from the limited futures their parents had carved out on failing farms. The prose was simple but effective, written by someone who knew the subject personally. The storm came up fast that afternoon, I continued. Lightning struck the library's main electrical panel at 2:47 p.m. The building had old wiring, installed when it was built in 1923. The fire started in the walls, spreading through the insulation before anyone smelled smoke. The temperature dropped again. Now I could see frost forming on the edges of the bookshelf nearest to me, delicate white crystals spreading across the spines. One book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, had ice climbing up from its base like fingers reaching for the title. Dorothy tried to evacuate the children, but the main doors had electronic locks tied to the electrical system. When the power failed, the locks engaged instead of releasing. The manual override was in the basement, behind the circulation desk. By the time the county sheriff arrived with bolt cutters, the smoke had filled the reading room where the children had gathered. I paused, looking up from the page. The 8 children stared at me with those oil-black eyes, waiting. The girl who'd spoken first, Margaret, raised one waxy hand and pointed at the book. "Keep going. Don't stop." My hands were cramping from holding the book so tight. I noticed my knuckles had gone white. The skin stretched thin. When I tried to adjust my grip, my fingers wouldn't respond properly. They felt stiff, cold, like I'd been outside in January without gloves. All 9 children died from smoke inhalation, I read. Dorothy Brennan survived with severe burns and psychological trauma. She never worked as a librarian again. The Elmwood Library was demolished in 1954. The land remained vacant until 1967, when developers built a strip mall on the site. The Elmwood fire prompted new building codes across Indiana, requiring emergency exits that functioned without electricity. I turned the page. The next chapter was titled, Where They Went. After the funerals, strange reports began circulating through Marion County. Parents claimed their children spoke of visiting a library in their dreams, a place with bright carpets and beanbags where story time never ended. 3 separate families described identical nightmares, their sons and daughters sitting in a circle, listening to a woman read, unable to leave or speak or move. In 1956, Ethel Pruitt, Samuel's mother, was committed to Richmond State Hospital after she set fire to the public library in Fortville, screaming that the wrong children were using the building. She died there in 1961. In 1958, Margaret Yoder's father, Harold, claimed he saw his daughter in the children's section of the Carnegie Library in Anderson. When staff investigated, they found the section empty, except for a single book left open on a beanbag, Charlotte's Web, Margaret's favorite. The book's copyright page had been torn out and replaced with a handwritten note. "We're still waiting for our story to end." Similar incidents have been documented at 17 libraries across Indiana between 1952 and present day. The phenomenon appears to concentrate in facilities built before 1950, particularly those with children's sections on upper floors. Library staff report finding duplicate sections, phantom carpets, and groups of silent children who appeared during closing hours. I stopped reading. My throat had gone raw, and I desperately needed water. Is that what this is? You're the Elmwood children? But this library was built in 1969. It doesn't fit the pattern. Margaret stood again, that same puppet-like rising. This building is new, but the land remembers. Columbus had a library before this one. Small, brick, 2 stories, built in 1891, burned down in 1952. 1952, the same year as Elmwood. Wait, I said, my brain finally catching up. You're saying there was a fire here too? In Columbus? 2 fires, Margaret corrected. Same day, same time, different counties. The Elmwood fire got newspaper coverage because Dorothy survived to tell reporters what happened. The Columbus fire killed everyone inside. No witnesses, no story. Just 11 bodies buried in Crown Hill Cemetery under a single marker that says, Lost Children of Columbus, May 14th, 1952. 11, not 9. My eyes scanned the room again, counting. 8 children visible. Where were the other 3? You need to keep reading, Margaret said. Chapter 3. The Lost Ones. That's where we are. That's where we've been stuck for 68 years. You have to read us through to Chapter 4. That's where we find out what happened to the other 3. That's where the story finally tells us who we are. She moved closer, and I could smell something acrid coming off her. Smoke and burned plastic, and underneath it all, the sweet rot of decay. Every librarian who finds us gets to this point. Most of them stop reading. They run. They try to leave. But you can't leave until the story is finished. That's Rule 4. The adult must read until the children are satisfied. I looked down at the book. Chapter 3 started on the next page. My fingers turned to it automatically, even though everything in my body wanted to drop the book and find another way out of this room. But Margaret was right. The bookshelves behind me were solid. The windows, I glanced over, had turned dark, showing nothing but empty black space instead of the Columbus streets below. I began reading Chapter 3, and that's when I learned the rules weren't meant to protect me from the children. They were meant to protect the children from what hunted them. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. Chapter 3. The Lost Ones. I read aloud, my voice barely steady now. Of the 11 children who died in the Columbus Library fire on May 14, 1952, only 8 bodies were identified immediately. The remaining 3, David Walsh, age 6, Judith Hartman, age 9, and Thomas Brennan, age 10, were listed as missing for 6 weeks before their remains were finally recovered from the library's basement. I stopped. Thomas Brennan? Any relation to Dorothy Brennan from Elmwood? Margaret's face remained blank. Her nephew. He was visiting from Indianapolis that week. Dorothy blamed herself for both fires. She thought if she'd never started the literacy programs, the children would have been home, safe. Keep reading. The book's pages had started to feel damp under my fingers, like they were absorbing moisture from somewhere. When I glanced down, I saw brown stains spreading across the margins, water damage, or something that looked like it. The investigation revealed that David, Judith, and Thomas had hidden in the basement when the fire started, following the librarian's instructions to find the safest room. the basement door locked from the outside. The children suffocated while rescue crews worked to breach the main entrance 3 floors above. Their bodies weren't discovered until June 27th, when demolition crews began tearing down the structure. But witnesses reported seeing the 3 children during those 6 weeks. Helen Walsh, David's mother, claimed her son stood outside her bedroom window every night at 3:47 a.m., the exact time the fire started. He never spoke, just pressed his palms against the glass and mouthed the same word over and over: forgot. Judith Hartman's teacher, Miss Ellen Kowalski. Stop! The voice came from behind me. I spun around. The wall of bookshelves had changed. Now there was a gap. Not the staircase I'd come up, but a narrow corridor between 2 shelf units. And standing in that corridor was a woman. She wore a dress from the 1950s, navy blue with white collar, and her hair was pinned back in victory rolls. But her face was wrong. Stretched too long, like someone had pulled on clay before it dried. Her smile showed too many teeth, all of them filed to points. Don't read that name, the woman said. Ellen Kowalski doesn't belong in our story. Margaret moved between me and the woman. She has to read it. All of it. That's the only way we get free. Free. The woman laughed, and the sound made my ears ring. You stupid children. You think a story will save you? I've been feeding on your fear for 68 years. Every librarian who reads this book adds another thread to my web, another source of sustenance. I look at Margaret. Who is she? We don't know, Margaret whispered. She was here when we arrived. She's always been here, in every library, every children's section. She's the reason we can't leave. The reason we're stuck between finishing the story and... The woman moved fast. One moment she stood in the corridor, the next she was directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her breath. Formaldehyde and ash. I am the collector. Every child who dies afraid, every adult who fails to save them, they belong to me. These 9 little souls have been mine since the flames took them. 9, not 11. I gripped the book tighter. The book says 11 died. David, Judith, and Thomas. Where are they? The collector's smile widened impossibly, splitting her face from ear to ear. Oh, they're special. They're mine in a different way. Would you like to see? Before I could answer, the floor beneath my feet turned soft. I sank ankle-deep into the alphabet carpet, which had transformed into something wet and organic. The letters twisted around my legs like living things, pulling me down. I tried to step back, but the carpet held firm. Rule 5, Margaret said urgently. Count the exits. I remembered Eleanor's laminated card. Always count the exits before your shift ends. But my shift wasn't ending. It was only 10:23, according to my frozen watch, even though Margaret had said it was 3:47. Time isn't moving right, I realized. We're stuck in a loop. I forced myself to look around the room, counting. The corridor where the collector had appeared. That was 1 exit. The windows. 2, 3, 4. They showed black void now, but they were still potential exits. The bookshelf wall where the stairs should be. That could count as 5 if the stairs were turned. As I counted, the carpet released its grip slightly. I pulled 1 foot free, then the other. The collector hissed, "Clever girl. But counting won't save you from what's coming. Keep reading. Get to chapter 4. That's where it gets interesting." She vanished, folding into the shadows between bookshelves like paper being crumpled. I looked at Margaret. What happens in chapter 4? We don't know. No one's ever read that far. They always run at chapter 3. Or, she gestured at the spot where the collector had stood. Or they become part of the collection. There are 7 adult ghosts trapped here. Former librarians who tried to help us. She keeps them in the basement, locked behind the card catalog drawers. The card catalog. Rule 3. Never pull the drawers fully open. My hands were shaking badly now, making it hard to hold the book steady. I wanted to run. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to drop this book, find another way out, call for help. But my phone sat on the circulation desk downstairs, plugged into the charger, and I was starting to understand that downstairs might not exist anymore, not in any way I could reach. Okay, I said, steadying my breathing. Okay. What if I keep reading? What if I get through chapter 4? Then what? Samuel spoke for the first time, his voice like dried leaves scraping pavement. Then you learn our real names. Not the names in the newspaper. Our true names, the ones we had before we died. And if you speak them aloud, we can finally rest. But the collector doesn't want that, Rebecca added, the girl with the throat scar. She needs us afraid, needs us trapped. Fear is what sustains her. If we find peace, she starves. I turned back to chapter 3, finding my place. After the 3 children's bodies were recovered in late June, the coroner noted peculiar findings. Their lungs contained no smoke damage. Their skin showed no heat exposure. Medical examination suggested they had died not from the fire itself, but from something else. Something the official report attributed to extreme stress and cardiac arrest brought on by terror. The air pressure in the room changed. My ears popped. The frost on the bookshelves began spreading faster, climbing up spines and across covers. Ice crackled as it formed, filling the room with tiny, sharp sounds. But Helen Walsh refused to accept the official explanation. I continued reading. She hired a private investigator named Frank Gerber, a former police detective from Indianapolis, to examine the basement where the children died. His report, filed on August 3, 1952, contained photographs that the Walsh family kept hidden for decades. The photographs showed handprints on the basement walls, small prints, child-sized, pressed into the concrete with enough force to leave indentations. But the prints weren't made by smoke or dirt. They were pressed in blood, and they formed patterns. Words repeated over and over around the room. Forgot us, forgot us, forgot us. All 8 children turned their heads toward me in perfect synchronization. When they spoke, their voices overlapped into a single whisper. She forgot us in the basement. The librarian. She told us to hide there and she'd come back for us, but she never came. She forgot we were down there. And while we waited, the collector found us first. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in thick white clouds. The book's pages had started to turn on their own now, flipping forward toward chapter 4 whether I wanted them to or not. That's not where chapter 3 ends, I protested, trying to hold the pages still. I'm not finished. The collector is forcing the story forward, Margaret said, her waxy face finally showing expression. Fear, real and human. She knows what chapter 4 contains. She's trying to stop you from reading it properly. If you skip ahead, you'll miss the part about the names. We'll be trapped forever. I pressed my palm flat against the pages, fighting to keep them from turning. The paper cut into my skin, drawing blood. The blood soaked into the page, and suddenly the text changed. New words appeared, written in my own handwriting. Grace Whitmore began her shift at Cleo Rogers Memorial Library at 7 a.m. on October 12th, 2023. She ended it at 3:47 p.m. when she climbed the stairs to the third floor that doesn't exist. She never came back down. Her body was found 3 days later in the Indiana history section, slumped over an open book about the Columbus Fire of 1952. The coroner's report noted no signs of trauma, just a look of absolute terror frozen on her face, and a library card clutched in her right hand. A card that shouldn't have existed, stamped with a date 68 years in the past. That was my future, written right there in my own handwriting, in my own blood. Unless I finished the story the right way. I took a deep breath and forced myself to turn back to where I'd stopped reading. Chapter 3, paragraph 12. I would not skip ahead. I would not let the collector control this narrative. The private investigator's report concluded with a disturbing observation. I read, my voice gaining strength. Frank Gerber noted that the basement door had been locked from the outside. Someone had deliberately trapped the children there, and in the weeks following the fire, 3 library employees quit without notice. Their names were never released to the public. Their whereabouts remained unknown. Until November 1952, when all 3 were found dead in their homes, apparent suicides, each left identical notes, 4 words long. We forgot the children. The room went silent. Even the crackling ice stopped. The 8 children stared at me, waiting. That's where chapter 3 ends, I said softly. Are you ready for chapter 4? Margaret nodded. Behind her, something moved in the darkness between the bookshelves. Something tall and thin with too many joints. The collector, watching. Waiting to see if I'd finish the story, or become another cautionary tale written in blood on library walls. I turned the page and began to read. Chapter 4. What we were before, I read, my voice cutting through the silence. The 11 children who died on May 14th, 1952, were not simply victims of a tragic fire. They were souls already marked, already seen, already chosen by something that had been waiting in the dark spaces between books for over a century. The collector laughed from somewhere in the shadows. Stop reading. You don't want to know what comes next. I ignored her and continued. The original Columbus Library was built on land purchased from the Lenape tribe in 1891. The tribe's elder, a woman named Winona Redfeather, warned the town council that the plot had been marked as forbidden ground, a place where the dead came to settle unfinished business. The council dismissed her concerns. Construction began in March of that year. By June, 3 workers had died in accidents. By August, the building's first librarian, Martha Hodge, reported hearing children's voices in the empty stacks after closing. She resigned after 2 months, claiming the library remembered things that hadn't happened yet. My throat felt raw, but I pushed through. The children sat motionless, their black eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Over the next 61 years, the Columbus Library documented 47 incidents of missing children's books reappearing in locations they'd never been shelved. Staff reported cold spots in the children's section, unexplained laughter, and the persistent smell of smoke, even though no fires had occurred. Then came May 14th, 1952. That morning, head librarian Virginia Keene received an anonymous letter. It contained 11 names, the names of children who would attend that afternoon's story time. At the bottom of the letter, written in ash, they belong to me now. They always have. I paused, letting that sink in. The letter was signed, The Collector. Margaret's waxy face cracked, a thin line splitting her cheek from eye to chin. She knew we were coming. She'd been waiting for us. The fire was never an accident, I read on, my hands trembling but my voice steady. Investigation records sealed by court order revealed that the building's electrical panel had been tampered with. Someone had deliberately created a short circuit time to trigger at 2:47 p.m., exactly when story time began. The basement door's lock had been damaged 3 days earlier, making it impossible to open from the inside. Virginia Keene and 2 assistant librarians, Patricia Donovan and Ruth Marsh, were the only adults in the building. All 3 survived. All 3 quit within a week. All 3 died by their own hands before November. But their suicide notes told only part of the story. The text on the page began to shift, the blue ink rearranging itself into new patterns. I blinked, trying to focus, but the words kept moving like ants across paper. Grace. Samuel's voice pulled my attention. She's trying to change the story. Don't watch the words move. Just read what you see in the moment you see it. Trust the first version. I nodded and focused on a single paragraph, reading before it could transform. Ruth Marsh's note contained a confession. She had received instructions, from whom, she wouldn't say, to guide specific children to the basement when the fire started. She was promised money, enough to pay off her late husband's debts. The instructions came with photographs of 11 children. 11 faces she would recognize when they arrived for story time. But Ruth's conscience broke when she heard them screaming from behind the locked door. She tried to open it, tried to find the key, but the collector appeared and offered a choice. Let the children die quickly from smoke, or watch them suffer something far worse. Ruth chose the lesser evil. She chose wrong. The temperature had dropped so low that ice formed on my eyelashes. I had to blink rapidly to keep them from freezing shut. The children's section looked different now. Older, shabbier, like I was seeing it through layers of time. The alphabet carpet showed cigarette burns. The beanbags had splits leaking foam. The mural of the cat in the hat was water damaged, the character's face warped into something nightmarish. I was seeing the original library, the one that burned. Keep reading, Rebecca urged. You're almost at the names, the real names. My eyes scanned ahead, another paragraph, maybe 2. And then I'd reach a list. Names in italics. Names that would give these children back what they'd lost. But the collector wasn't going to let me get there easily. The shadows between the bookshelves began to move, coalescing into shapes. Humanoid but wrong, with limbs that bent backwards, and faces that were smooth expanses of skin, broken only by mouths. 7 shapes. 7 adult ghosts. The former librarians who tried to help and failed. They moved toward me in synchronized steps, their mouths opening in silent screams. Rule 5, I said quickly. Count the exits before your shift ends. I scanned the room again. The corridor, 1. 4 windows, 2, 3, 4, 5. The bookshelf wall, 6, if the stairs returned. But I needed a 7th. The rules always came in patterns, always in numbers that mattered. Then I saw it. The book in my hands. The story itself. That was the 7th exit. The only one that really mattered. As soon as I understood, the 7 ghost librarians stopped advancing. They stood frozen, mouths still open, arms outstretched, trapped mid-motion like someone had paused a video. The collector's voice filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. You think you're clever. You think understanding the rules gives you power. But I wrote the rules, Grace Whitmore. I've been writing them for over a century. Every prohibition, every warning, every instruction, they're all designed to feed me. Fear of breaking rules, fear of consequences, fear of the unknown. It all sustains me. Then why do you care if I finish reading? I shot back. If the rules help you, why try to stop me? Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe she'd left. Then, because Chapter 4 contains the one rule I didn't write. The one rule that existed before me. Before this library, before any of this. The rule that can end me. My heart hammered. What rule? Keep reading and find out. If you dare. I looked at Margaret, at Samuel, Rebecca, and the other 5 children whose names I still didn't know. 8 souls trapped in a nightmare for 68 years because adults had failed them. Because the collector had used their fear and abandonment to feed herself, growing stronger with each passing decade. I thought about Eleanor Vance, shaking as she handed me the laminated card. How long had she known about this? How many times had she climbed these phantom stairs and turned back before reaching this point? But I wasn't Eleanor. I wasn't Ruth Marsh or Virginia Keene or any of the other adults who'd made the wrong choice when it mattered. I cleared my throat and read. The 11 children died, but they were not granted peace. The collector kept their souls tethered to the library, feeding on their confusion and terror. She gave them new names, victim names, names made of fear and forgetting. She took their true names and hid them in stories, in books, in the very structure of every library built on cursed ground. But the Lenape elder Winona Redfeather had foreseen this possibility. Before her death in 1893, she performed a naming ceremony for children not yet born. She spoke 11 names into the smoke of sacred tobacco and bound them to a promise. If someone with courage enough to face the collector ever spoke these names aloud, the children would be released from their bondage. The names were hidden in plain sight, woven into library records, birth certificates, newspaper obituaries. But the collectors scattered the evidence, making it nearly impossible for any one person to piece the truth together. Until now. The page turned on its own, revealing the list. 11 names in elegant italics: Margaret Eleanor Yoder, Samuel James Pruitt, Rebecca Ann Finch, Henry Theodore Walsh, Constance Marie Hartman, Peter Nicholas Brennan, Dorothy Faith Tucker, Alice Grace Morrison, William Charles Kensington. I stopped. 9 names. The page showed 9 names, but it had said 11. I looked at the children. Still only 8 visible. "Where are the other 2 names?" I asked. David, Judith, and Thomas, the ones trapped in the basement. There should be 3 more names. Margaret's voice came out flat, defeated. "Look at the names again. Really look." I scanned the list. Henry Theodore Walsh, David's real name. Constance Marie Hartman, Judith's real name. But Thomas Brennan was listed as Peter Nicholas Brennan, not Thomas. Peter. Thomas was a nickname, Margaret explained. His birth certificate said Peter, but he hated it, made everyone call him Thomas instead. The collector knew that. She knew his real name wasn't the name he answered to, so when you read the list, you'll free the child who was Peter, not the boy who was Thomas. He'll stay trapped. That's why no one succeeded. The names are technically correct, but they're not complete. They don't include the names the children actually used, the identities they'd chosen for themselves. And the 11th name, Rebecca added quietly. The 11th child isn't on that list at all. Because the 11th child isn't dead. Not yet. She looked directly at me. The 11th child is you, Grace. The collector has been grooming you for this position since you started working here 3 years ago. Every time you shelved books in the Indiana history section, every time you walked past that card catalog in the basement, Every time you followed one of Eleanor's rules, you were being marked, prepared. The story needs an ending, and you're supposed to be it. The book's final page materialized in front of me, text appearing in real time. Grace Elizabeth Whitmore, age 28, librarian, the collector's 11th soul. Trapped, May 14th, 2025, exactly 73 years after the original fire. The cycle completes. The collection grows. The story begins again. May 14th, 2025. That was tomorrow, which meant I still had time to rewrite the ending. No, I said it quietly at first, then louder. No, I'm not part of your collection. I'm not your 11th victim. The collector materialized directly in front of me, her stretched face contorting with amusement. You already are. The moment you walked through those glass doors 3 years ago, you became mine. Did you think it was coincidence that Eleanor hired you? That you got the job despite having no library science degree? I whispered your name to her in dreams. I made her seek you out. I thought back to my interview. Eleanor had called me out of nowhere, said my resume had crossed her desk, even though I'd never applied. She'd seemed nervous even then, hands shaking as she poured coffee, asking strange questions about my beliefs in the supernatural, whether I'd ever experienced anything unexplainable. She'd been trying to warn me. In her own way, she'd been trying to protect me. Eleanor followed the rules, I said. All of them. And she's still alive, still working here. If I was always meant to be your 11th soul, why hasn't she been taken? Because Eleanor is a coward. The collector's voice dripped with contempt. She counts the exits, but never takes them. She avoids the Indiana history section after dark. She's kept herself safe by keeping the story incomplete. But safety isn't freedom. She's as trapped as these children, just on the other side of the glass. Margaret stepped forward, placing herself between me and the collector. You're wasting time. Grace, the names, you have to say them. All 11, their real names, the ones they chose for themselves. I only have 9, I said, and one of those is wrong. Peter instead of Thomas. Then figure it out. Samuel moved to stand beside Margaret. One by one, the other 6 children formed a semicircle around me, creating a barrier between me and the collector. You're a librarian. You know how to research. You know how to find information buried in records. The tools are all around you. I looked at the bookshelves surrounding us. Thousands of volumes, most of them coated in frost now, spines barely readable through the ice. But these weren't the modern books from the Cleo Rogers Memorial Library. These were older texts, from the original 1891 building. History books, census records, newspaper archives. The library remembered. That's what Martha Hodge had said back in 1891. The library remembered things that hadn't happened yet, which meant it also remembered things that had. Rule 3, I said suddenly, the card catalog in the basement. You said never to pull the drawers fully open because that's where the 7 librarian ghosts are trapped. But card catalogs don't trap people. They organize information. What if the rule isn't about protecting us from ghosts? What if it's about preventing us from accessing certain records? The collector hissed, her stretched face elongating even further. Clever girl. But you can't reach the basement. The stairs are gone. You're stuck here until tomorrow at 2:47 p.m., when the fire starts again and your story ends. There are 7 exits, I countered. I counted them. And I just realized something. The rules never said I couldn't create my own exit. I opened the book again, flipping past chapter 4 to the blank pages at the end. Every book had them. Buffer pages, space for notes or future editions. I pulled a pen from my cardigan pocket, the same pen I use daily to annotate patron requests, and I began to write. Grace Whitmore stood in the Phantom Children's section and made a choice. She chose to rewrite the ending. She chose to break the pattern that had trapped 11 souls for 73 years. And her first act of revision was this. She created a door. As I wrote, the words appeared simultaneously on the wall of bookshelves behind me. Not printed, handwritten in glowing blue ink that matched my pen, the words formed an outline, a rectangle, 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide, a door frame made of sentences. The collector shrieked. The sound split the air like breaking glass, and the 7 frozen librarian ghosts shattered, fragments of their forms scattering across the carpet like ice. You can't rewrite the story. The collector's voice had lost its smooth confidence, turned ragged with fury. The story is fixed. The names are hidden. The cycle is eternal. Nothing's eternal, I said, still writing, not even fear, and I just realized something else about your rules. Rule 1, never reshelf books in the Indiana history section after 9 p.m. That's not a warning. That's a clue. The Indiana history section is where you've hidden the real information. The obituaries, the birth records, the newspaper archives that would reveal the children's true names. The names they answered to, not just what their parents wrote on certificates. I stopped writing and looked at the children. Do you remember? Do you remember what people called you, even if it wasn't your legal name? Margaret's waxy face cracked further, emotion breaking through. I was Margaret, but everyone called me Maggie. My mother said Margaret Eleanor sounded too formal for a little girl who climbed trees and caught frogs. I was James, Samuel said. Samuel was my grandfather's name, but Dad called me James from the day I was born. One by one, the children spoke their chosen names. Rebecca stayed Rebecca. She'd liked the formality of it. Henry Walsh went by Hank. Constance Hartman was Connie. Peter Brennan was Thomas, just like I'd thought. Dorothy Tucker went by Dot. Alice Morrison was Allie. William Kensington was Billy. 9 names. 9 children. But there should be 11. I looked at the empty spaces in the semicircle. 2 gaps where children should stand. Where are the last 2? The ones who aren't here with the others? Rebecca's voice came out barely above a whisper. They escaped. 2 children got out of the fire alive, but died from their injuries 3 days later in the hospital. The collector couldn't take them because they died surrounded by family, loved, remembered. Their names were never forgotten. Then why does the story say 11 died? I asked. Because the collector needed 11 for the cycle, Margaret explained. 9 trapped immediately, 2 marked for future collection. She's been waiting 73 years for the perfect 10th and 11th souls, people who would willingly walk into her trap, who would follow the rules right into her grasp. I felt cold realization settle over me. Eleanor Vance was supposed to be the 10th. That's why she gave me the rules. She was trying to pass the curse to me, to save herself. No, Margaret shook her head. Eleanor gave you the rules because she knew you were strong enough to break them. She's been researching for 40 years, gathering pieces of the story, waiting for someone brave enough to finish it. She couldn't do it herself. She was too afraid, too marked. But you're different. You're not afraid of the right things. I looked at the door I'd written into existence. The words glowed brighter now, the outline solid enough to cast shadows. If I go through that door, will it take me to the Indiana history section? It will take you where the story needs you to go, Samuel said. But Grace, if you leave us here, The collector can rewrite the ending before you get back. You need to take us with you." "How?" I looked at the book in my hands. "You're bound to this space." "We're bound to the story," Margaret corrected. "Take the book. As long as you have it, we're connected to you. We can help you search. We remember things, dates, names, places. We've been stuck in 1952 for 7 decades. We know that year better than anyone." I tucked the book under my arm and approached the door I'd written. Up close, I could see the words more clearly. Grace Whitmore stood in the Phantom Children's section and made a choice. She chose to rewrite the ending. The collector's voice came from everywhere, desperate now. "If you go through that door, you'll be breaking Rule 2. Never investigate the sounds of children laughing on the second floor after closing. You'll trigger consequences you can't imagine." I reached for the doorknob that had materialized in the center of the glowing outline. Rule 2 isn't about investigation. It's about ignoring suffering, ignoring cries for help. I've been following your rules for 3 years, keeping my head down, avoiding trouble. But here's the thing about librarians. Our actual job is to find information people are trying to hide, to make knowledge accessible, to give voices to the forgotten. I turned the knob. The door swung open, revealing not the Indiana history section, but something far older. A stone staircase spiraling down into darkness, walls carved with symbols I didn't recognize. At the bottom I could see flickering light, candles or lanterns, something pre-electric. "The original library," Margaret breathed. "The one from 1891. It exists underneath everything else. The collector built her collection in the foundation, literally beneath every library constructed on this land." I started down the stairs. Behind me, I felt the children following, not physically present, but connected through the book I carried. Their memories, their knowledge, their hope. The collector's scream followed us down. "You'll die down there. The basement doesn't let anyone leave alive. Rule 3 exists for a reason." "Yeah," I called back, "because you don't want anyone finding the card catalog. You don't want anyone organizing the truth. But that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to catalog every lie you've told, every name you've hidden, every soul you've trapped." The staircase went deeper than it should, past the foundation of the 1969 building, past the ruins of the 1952 structure, down into the bedrock itself. The symbols on the walls changed as I descended, from English to something older, maybe Lenape, maybe older still. At the bottom, I found a room that shouldn't exist. Circular, carved from solid rock, illuminated by oil lamps hung from iron hooks, and in the center of the room sat a card catalog. Not a modern filing system, but the original. Wooden drawers with brass handles, each drawer labeled in handwritten script. But the labels weren't Dewey Decimal categories. They were names, hundreds of names, maybe thousands. Every soul the collector had taken over the past century, organized alphabetically. I approached the catalog slowly, aware that each step took me further from any possible escape route. The book under my arm felt heavier now, like it was gaining weight with each name I passed. The first drawer read A. Anderson, the second Andrews-Baker. I scanned down, looking for the section I needed. There. Walsh, Yoder. My hand hovered over the brass handle. Rule 3. Never pull the drawers fully open. But Margaret had helped me understand. The rule wasn't about safety. It was about keeping the truth buried. I gripped the handle and pulled. The drawer came out smoothly, well-oiled hinges making no sound. Inside, instead of index cards, I found pages torn from various documents: birth certificates, obituary clippings, school enrollment forms, photographs, each item tagged with a name written in ash. I found Margaret's file first. Birth certificate, Margaret Eleanor Yoder. School record, Maggie Yoder, grade 3. Photo, a little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Nothing like the waxy mannequin I'd seen upstairs. I kept searching, pulling out files one by one. Samuel James Pruitt, James to his father, Sam to friends. Rebecca Ann Finch. Insisted on full name, proper girl. Each child's real identity preserved in fragments of paperwork the collector had hoarded. Then I reached the back of the drawer and found 2 files that made my breath catch. Not children's records, adult death certificates. Eleanor Vance. Dated May 14th, 2025. Tomorrow. Cause of death. Found in Indiana history section. Apparent heart failure. Expression of terror. And beneath it, Grace Elizabeth Whitmore. Same date, same location, same cause. The collector had been planning this for years. 2 souls to complete her collection. 2 librarians who'd gotten too close to the truth. But there was something else in the drawer. A small leather journal, edges charred from fire. I opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was shaky but legible. If you're reading this, you've made it further than anyone else. My name is Winona Redfeather, and I am the last keeper of true names. Footsteps echoed on the stone stairs above. Heavy, measured, getting closer. The collector was coming down to stop me from reading what Winona had written, and I was running out of time. I flipped through Winona's journal, racing against the approaching footsteps. The first pages documented the sale of the land in 1891, her warnings ignored by the town council. But midway through, the entries changed tone. October 3rd, 1891. The building is finished, but it was built wrong. They put the children's reading room directly above the burial grounds, where we laid our own lost ones to rest. The boundary between worlds grows thin in places where children's joy meets children's sorrow. Something has noticed. October 17th, 1891. Martha Hodge reports strange occurrences. Books moving, whispers in empty rooms. I told her to burn sage, to speak prayers of protection, but she refuses. She says I am superstitious. She does not understand that some hungers are older than hunger for food. November 2nd, 1891. I have seen it. The thing that feeds on forgotten children. It wears the shape of a woman, but moves like smoke through cracks in walls. It has been waiting here for decades, perhaps centuries. Our ancestors knew it. They called it Eater of Names. We thought it had moved on when we left this territory, but it merely went dormant, waiting for the right conditions to feed again. The footsteps stopped. The collector stood at the bottom of the stairs, no longer bothering with her human disguise. She'd become something else entirely. A column of shadow with too many limbs, a face that kept splitting and reforming, teeth made of rusted nails and splinters of bone. "That journal is mine," she said, her voice layered with multiple tones. "Winona tried to stop me. She failed, just like you'll fail." I kept my eyes on the journal, reading faster. "If you're so confident I'll fail, why are you here? Why not let me try and watch me collapse like the others? Because you have something they didn't." The shadow thing moved closer, and I could smell decay rolling off her in waves. "You have stubbornness. You have anger. And worst of all, you have the children's trust. They've shown you their true names willingly. That hasn't happened in 73 years. I found the page I needed, dated May 13th, 1952, one day before the fire. May 13th, 1952. I am old now, dying. The doctors say I have weeks, perhaps days. But I must record this before I go. The Eater of Names has grown stronger. It plans something terrible. I have seen it in dreams. 11 children, trapped in flames that never consume them, screaming names that no one remembers. The only way to break its hold is to speak each child's true name, the name they answered to in life, the name that held their identity and self-recognition, while standing in the place where they died. But there is a complication. The Eater requires 11 for its cycle. If you free 9, it will simply claim 2 more to complete the collection. The cycle must break entirely, or not at all. The solution lies in understanding that the Eater itself has a name. A true name, spoken by my grandmother's grandmother when it first appeared in this land. If someone speaks the Eater's name after freeing the children's souls, it will be bound by the same rules it imposed on others. It will be named, recognized, remembered, and thus rendered powerless to operate in shadow. The entry ended there. I flipped the page desperately, looking for the Eater's name, but the next pages were burned to ash. Only fragments remained. Name must be spoken with. Fear is not enough, you must... The final word is... Nothing legible. The crucial information destroyed. Winona never finished, the collector said, satisfaction dripping from her voice. She died the night after writing that entry. I made sure she burned the name before she could record it. Her cabin caught fire. Such a tragic accident. The journal survived only because her granddaughter pulled it from the flames, but the damage was done. I looked at the death certificate still lying in the drawer. Tomorrow. Eleanor and I both had less than 24 hours unless I figured this out. The 2 children who escaped, I said suddenly, the ones who died in the hospital. You said they were surrounded by love, by family. They were remembered. What were their names? Margaret's voice came from the book I carried, faint but clear. Joseph Tucker and Linda Kensington, Dot's older brother and Billy's little sister. They got out through a window on the first floor, but their lungs were damaged. They died 3 days later, holding their mother's hands. Tucker Kensington. I looked back at the catalog drawer, at the files I'd pulled. Dorothy Dot Tucker, William Billy Kensington. The families, I said, pieces clicking together. Joseph and Linda weren't forgotten, but their younger siblings were trapped here. The families were so destroyed by losing one child that they couldn't fully grieve the second, especially when the bodies weren't found right away. By the time they were recovered from the basement, 6 weeks later. The families had moved on, Rebecca finished quietly, trying to survive, trying to forget the pain. They held funerals, but their hearts weren't in it anymore. They'd used up all their grief on Joseph and Linda. Dot and Billy became afterthoughts, and that's when the collector took them fully. The shadow thing laughed. You understand the mechanics, but understanding doesn't give you power. You still don't have my name. And at 2:47 p.m. tomorrow, when that electrical panel shorts out in the Indiana history section, yes, I've rigged it already, just like I did in 1952, you and Eleanor will join my collection. 11 souls, finally complete. The cycle will reset, and I'll have another 73 years to feed before I need to do this again. I looked at the children's files spread across the floor. 9 names. 9 souls who'd trusted me enough to reveal their true identities. I thought about Eleanor upstairs, counting exits she never took, following rules that kept her safe but trapped. I thought about Winona, dying alone, trying to finish her journal before the fire took it. And I thought about libraries, about what they actually are. You're called the Collector, I said slowly, and you hoard information. You keep it locked away in card catalogs and burned journals and forgotten basements. You organize souls like books on a shelf, categorized and controlled. Efficient, isn't it? The shadow thing's teeth glinted. Order from chaos. Purpose from suffering. But that's not what libraries are for. I stood, clutching Winona's journal and the children's files. Libraries aren't about hoarding information. They're about sharing it, making it accessible, giving it to people who need it. You've organized these souls, locked them away, but you've also preserved them. Every drawer in this catalog is a record. Every file is evidence. I pulled the next drawer open. Baker, Brennan. Then the next. Brennan, Chen. I started yanking drawers out systematically, scattering files across the stone floor. The collector shrieked, "Stop! You're destroying the organization, the order!" "I'm destroying your control," I corrected. "Every soul you've cataloged, every name you've hidden, it's all here. You kept records because you're still bound by library rules. You're still part of this place, subject to its systems. And in library systems, there's one name that appears in every catalog, every classification system, every organizational structure." I found it in the final drawer. A card unlike the others, written in Winona's handwriting. Original name, Lenape designation, Achikrul Meshwelamalmikan. English translation, the spirit who eats what is named. Below it, Winona had added a note. My grandmother's grandmother called it by a shorter name, one that held power. She said, "If you name the name eater, it becomes what it consumes, a named thing, trapped by identity just as it traps others." And at the bottom, in different ink, more recent, Eleanor found this. Eleanor knows. She's been trying to pronounce it correctly for 40 years. She can't do it alone. The name requires two voices speaking in unison. One from the present, one from the past. One living, one dead. I don't know how to make that work. Winona's granddaughter, 1987. Two voices, one living, one dead. I looked at the book under my arm, the story I'd been reading. Margaret's voice had come through it. All the children had spoken through it. "The book is a bridge," I said, "between worlds, between present and past. If I read Winona's words aloud while holding it, her voice comes through too. Two voices, present and past." The collector lunged at me, shadow limbs extending like spears. I dove aside, the journal clutched to my chest, files scattered under my feet. The oil lamps swung on their hooks, casting wild shadows across the walls. "You can't pronounce it," the collector screamed. "The name is Lenape. You don't speak the language. Even if you try, you'll say it wrong, and speaking it wrong only makes me stronger." She was right. I didn't speak Lenape, had no idea how to pronounce the syllables written on that card. But I knew someone who did. "Margaret," I called out, scrambling to my feet. "Maggie, when you were alive, did any of your family speak Lenape?" This area was Lenape territory. There must have been some crossover, some families who kept the language alive. A long pause. Then, my grandmother. She was half Lenape, half German. She taught me prayers in both languages. I was too young to understand what they meant, but I remembered the sounds. Is the name a prayer? It's a designation, a classification. I found the card again, reading the strange syllables. "Can you see these words?" "Through the book, through our connection. Can you see what I'm seeing?" "Yes." Margaret's voice strengthened. "I can see it, and I remember now. My grandmother said something similar once, when I asked her about bad spirits. She called them Oh. Oh no. Grace, that's not just a name. It's a binding spell. If you speak it wrong, it doesn't bind the spirit. It binds you to the spirit instead. The collector's laughter filled the chamber. Finally, you understand. Every librarian who found that card and tried to speak the name, they became mine instantly. They strengthened me. You're about to do the same. I looked at the death certificates again. Eleanor and Grace, both dated tomorrow. Eleanor found this card. She tried to speak the name alone. That's when she got marked for collection. 40 years ago, the collector confirmed. She's been living on borrowed time ever since, following rules to delay the inevitable. But she knew eventually she'd slip up. So she found you. Someone young enough, brave enough, foolish enough to try what she couldn't finish. Then I'll finish it. I held up the book and the card together. Maggie, we do this together. You pronounce it first so I can hear the correct sounds. Then we say it in unison. 2 voices, one living and one dead, speaking the same words. That's what Winona meant. Grace, if we're wrong, I join your collection tomorrow anyway. At least this way I tried. I heard the collector moving, shadow limbs scraping against stone as she positioned herself to strike the moment I opened my mouth. I took a breath. Whenever you're ready, Maggie. From the book, clear and strong, came a child's voice speaking words from a century ago. I listened, memorizing the rhythm, the emphasis, the particular way her tongue shaped sounds I'd never heard before. Then I repeated them. And somewhere in the combination of my voice and hers, past and present overlapping, the true name took form. The words left my mouth in perfect synchronization with Maggie's voice from the book. Achik fmechwelenam wikan. The collector froze mid-lunge. Her shadow limbs stopped extending, hanging in the air like someone had paused reality itself. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the oil lamps began to flicker, and the stone walls started to hum, a low resonance that I felt in my teeth, my bones, my skull. The collector's form began to contract, not violently but systematically, as if invisible hands were folding her back into herself. The shadow limbs retracted, the multiple faces merged into one, the teeth dissolved. Within seconds, she stood before me as she'd first appeared, a woman in a 1950s dress with Victory Roll hair. But her expression had changed. The smugness, the predatory confidence, gone, replaced by something I recognized from working reference desks for 3 years. Confusion when reality didn't match expectation. What did you do? Her voice came out singular now, stripped of its layered tones. Almost human. I named you, I said. Just like you've been naming others for over a century. Categorizing them, filing them away, binding them to your collection through the act of recognition. I held up Winona's card. But names work both ways. Once something is truly named, it becomes subject to the same rules it imposes. The collector looked down at her hands. They were solidifying, losing their ability to shift into shadow. No, I'm the eater of names. I consume identity. I can't be consumed. You already have been, Nige said from the book, her voice stronger now. The moment Grace spoke your true name with me, you became what you feared most, a classified thing, an organized entry in the catalog you created. You're not the collector anymore. You're part of the collection. The woman's eyes widened. She turned to run up the stairs, but her feet wouldn't move. She looked down and saw what I was seeing. Her shoes had merged with the stone floor. She was becoming part of the foundation, being absorbed into the very structure she'd built her feeding ground upon. This isn't possible, she whispered, Rule 3, I said. The card catalog is for reference only. Never pull the drawers fully open. But I did. I pulled every drawer, scattered every file, destroyed your organizational system. And in library systems, when something loses its classification, loses its designated place, it gets discarded or integrated into the structure itself. You're being integrated. The stone was climbing up her calves now, encasing her legs like concrete. She clawed at the floor, trying to pull herself free, but the integration continued. Waist, chest, shoulders. The children, she gasped. If I'm integrated, they're still bound. The binding was tied to my mane, yes, but also to the building, the land, the curse Winona's people accidentally created when they buried their own dead here. Freeing me doesn't free them. I'd expected this. Entities like her didn't give up without trying to bargain, to ensure their work continued even in defeat. You're lying. The Lenape didn't create this curse. You existed before they came to this territory. Winona's journal says her grandmother's grandmother knew about you. That means you're at least 200 years old, probably older. 317, the collector admitted. The stone had reached her neck. Only her head remained free. I was here when the first Europeans arrived. I was here when the Lenape settled. I was here when earlier peoples built their burial mounds. I've always been here, in the places where knowledge gets stored and forgotten, where stories die unfinished, where names fade from memory. Then you're not tied to any specific curse, I said. You're just a parasite. And when the host names the parasite, the infection ends. The stone covered her mouth. Her eyes stared at me, full of rage and something that might have been fear, until the rock claimed those too. Within seconds, she'd become another feature of the chamber's floor, a woman-shaped protrusion in the stone, barely recognizable as having once been Annanette. The book in my hands began to warm, not painfully, but noticeably. I opened it and saw new text appearing on the pages, writing itself in real time. The binding breaks when the collector falls, but the children remain in stasis between death and peace. They need their names spoken in the place where they died. 9 souls, 9 true names. The reader must speak them. I looked at the files scattered across the floor, then at the stone woman who'd been the collector. She said they died in the basement. But which basement? The 1952 building's basement or this chamber? Both. James's voice came through the book. The buildings overlapped in certain places. The basement where we were locked in 1952 exists in the same physical space as this chamber, though the same locations separated only by time. That made sense in the twisted logic of this place. The library remembered things that hadn't happened yet, because time wasn't linear here. It was layered, all moments existing simultaneously. Then I'll speak your names here, I said. All 9 of you. The names you chose, the identities you claimed. I picked up the files one by one, reading from the school records and photographs, finding the notations that showed who these children really were. Margaret Eleanor Yoder. You were Maggie, the girl who climbed trees and caught frogs. I name you and release you. The air shimmered. In the corner of my vision, I saw a small figure materialize, translucent, fading but smiling. The waxy mannequin appearance was gone. This was a real child, dressed in 1950s clothes, with pigtails and that gap-toothed grin from her photograph. "Thank you," Maggie whispered. Then she dissipated like morning fog. I continued through the files. Samuel James Pruitt. You were James, your father's son. I name you and release you. Another shimmer. Another child appearing and fading, freed from 73 years of trapped suffering. Rebecca Ann Finch, you were Rebecca. You chose formality and owned it. I name you and release you. One by one, I spoke their names. Henry Hank Walsh, Constance Connie Hartman, Peter Thomas Brennan. Here I spoke both names, acknowledging that he'd chosen Thomas, even though his birth certificate said Peter. Dorothy Dot Tucker, Alice Allie Morrison, William Billy Kensington. Each child appeared as I spoke their name, showed me their real face from life, and then dissolved into peace. 8 liberations. 8 souls finally released. But the book stayed warm in my hands. Something was unfinished. I looked at the scattered files again, counting. 9 children had died in the basement. I'd freed 8. Who was I missing? Then I saw it. A file I'd overlooked, stuck to the back of Billy Kensington's folder. Eleanor Grace Vance. Not a death certificate, a birth certificate. Born May 14th, 1952. The same day as the fire. I opened the file with shaking hands. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Columbus Tribune, dated May 15th, 1952. Local woman dies in childbirth. During library fire, Margaret Vance, 32, passed away yesterday while giving birth in the Columbus Library during the tragic fire that claimed 11 young lives. The woman had gone into premature labor while attending her son's storytime session. Her newborn daughter, Eleanor Grace Vance, survived and is being cared for by family members. Eleanor's mother had died in the fire. Eleanor had been born in the fire. That's why she was marked. That's why the collector had been circling her for 73 years. But Eleanor wasn't dead. She was upstairs, counting exits, following rules, trapped by fear, but alive. Unless... I flipped to the death certificates again. Eleanor's read May 14th, 2025. Tomorrow. But as I watched, the date began to change. The numbers blurred, reformed. May 14th, 1952. Eleanor had been dead all along. Or rather, she died the day she was born, but the collector had kept her consciousness tethered, using her as a lure for others. An eternal guardian who could never leave, but could guide new victims into the trap. "Oh, God," I whispered. "Eleanor wasn't protecting me." She was bait. The book pulsed in my hands. New text appeared. Speak her name. Free her. She never got to choose who she was. She was only ever defined by survival. Give her that choice now. I looked at the birth certificate. Eleanor Grace Vance. Legal name. Official name. But what name had she wanted? I thought about my 3 years working with her. How she'd always corrected patrons who called her Mrs. Vance, saying, "Eleanor is fine." How she'd signed cards and memos as E. Vance. How she'd once mentioned in passing that her mother had planned to call her Ella, a softer version, more personal, but died before she could tell anyone. "Eleanor Grace Vance," I said, holding her file. "Your mother wanted to call you Ella. I name you Ella Vance. I recognize you as the person you should have been allowed to become, and I release you." The chamber shook. Not violently, but like a settling, the way old buildings shift when internal pressure changes. I felt something rush past me, a presence moving upward through the layers of reality, through the stone and wood and glass, toward the surface. The book in my hands went cool. The words on its pages began to fade, the blue ink evaporating like water on hot pavement. Within seconds, most of the text had vanished, leaving only a dedication page. For the children who were forgotten, and the librarian who remembered them. Dash Grace Whitmore. I'd written that. or I was about to write it. Time was still slippery here. The oil lamps brightened. The files on the floor began to burn, not destructively, but cleanly, turning to ash that smelled like sage and tobacco smoke. Winona's protective ceremony, finally completing itself decades after her death. My watch, frozen at 10:23 for hours, suddenly ticked forward. 10:24. Then the second hand began its normal sweep. Time was moving again. I looked at the staircase leading up to the Cleo Rogers Memorial Library. The stone had returned to normal concrete. The Lenape symbols on the walls had faded. The card catalog remained, but its drawers were empty now. Just wooden boxes waiting to be filled with legitimate records. I climbed the stairs, legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline and the weight of what I had just done. When I reached the top, I found myself in the basement of the modern library. The actual basement, not a phantom version. The fluorescent lights were on. The concrete floor was clean. Everything looked exactly as it should. I checked my watch again. 10:25 a.m. October 12th, 2023. I'd been in the Phantom Children's section for just 2 minutes, even though it had felt like hours. But the book was still in my hands, and written on the last page, in handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. Thank you. But there are other libraries, other children. Will you help them too? As I read those words, the book spontaneously combusted. Not violently, just a gentle flame that consumed the pages without burning my hands. The ashes fell to the floor and reformed themselves into a small rectangle of plastic, a library card. Brand new. My name embossed on the front. Grace Whitmore. But the back had special printing. Special collections access, all Indiana libraries, permanent. And a date stamp. May 14th, 2025. I still had a job to finish. Other children, other libraries, other collections that needed to be freed. But at least now I knew I wouldn't be doing it alone. I called in sick for 3 days after what happened in the basement. Mrs. Kemp emailed asking where I was, worried because I'd never missed a Tuesday reading circle before. Tom Vestry left a note at the circulation desk wondering if I was okay. Even the architecture tourists seemed concerned when they stopped by and found someone else handling the front desk. When I finally returned on Monday, October 16th, the library felt different. Lighter somehow. The Indiana history section no longer gave me that crawling sensation between my shoulder blades. The basement door didn't make me hesitate before opening it. And when I walked past the second floor, I heard no phantom children laughing. Eleanor's office sat empty. Her belongings had been cleared out over the weekend. The head of library services said she'd called Friday morning to resign, effective immediately. Said she was moving to Florida to be with family. Her voice had sounded different on the phone, they told me. Younger, happy. I knew the truth. Eleanor, Ella, was finally free. Wherever she'd gone, it wasn't Florida. It was somewhere beyond the layers of trapped time, beyond the curse that had tethered her consciousness to this building for 73 years. She'd been given the choice she never had in life. And she'd taken it. The library card in my pocket stayed cool most days, but on October 29th, exactly 2 weeks after the incident, it began to warm during my lunch break. I pulled it out and watched as new text appeared on the back. Marion County Public Library, Elmwood Memorial Branch. Special collection requires attention. Elmwood, the other fire from May 14th, 1952. The one that killed Dorothy Brennan's nephew and 8 other children. I drove there after my shift ended. The Elmwood branch was small, built in 1993 on the site of the original library. The staff seemed surprised when I showed them my card and asked about their special collections. They had no such designation in their system. But when I walked to the children's section, I saw it. A reading nook that shouldn't exist, tucked behind the picture book shelves. 8 children sat there with books in their laps, not moving, not breathing. Their clothes were from the 1950s. Their skin had that waxy mannequin quality. And they smiled when they saw me. I'd spent 2 weeks researching the Elmwood fire. I knew their names now, their legal names and the ones they'd chosen. I knew Dorothy Brennan had survived and blamed herself. I knew the guilt had destroyed her. What I didn't know was that I'd already written their story. When I got home that night, I found a book on my coffee table. Hardcover, slim, with a simple design. The title read, "The 9 Children of Elmwood by Anonymous Librarian." I opened it with shaking hands. The entire book was filled with my handwriting. Neat, careful cursive that detailed everything about the Elmwood fire. The children's names, the circumstances, the investigation, the aftermath. I documented Dorothy's guilt, her descent into mental illness, her death in Richmond State Hospital. I didn't remember writing any of it. But there it was, hundreds of pages in my own hand. The last page was blank. As I stared at it, words began to appear, writing themselves in blue ink. Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for telling our story so we could be more than forgotten victims. But there are other libraries, other children trapped by the Collectors Network. She built her feeding ground across all of Indiana, in every library constructed on land she'd marked. Will you help them too? Before I could answer, the library card in my pocket grew hot. I pulled it out and watched as it burst into flames. Small, controlled, not burning my fingers. The plastic melted, reformed, solidified into a new card. The front still read Grace Whitmore. But the back had changed. Special collections access, all Indiana libraries, permanent. Current assignment, 47 locations remaining. Next deadline, May 14th, 2025. May 14th, 2025. 73 years after the fives. The date when the cycle would try to reset itself. When the collector's curse would attempt to claim new souls. If I didn't finish clearing her network first. I had 7 months to free 47 groups of trapped children scattered across Indiana. 7 months to write their stories, speak their names, break their bindings. I opened my laptop and started a new document. The Forgotten Libraries of Indiana. A catalog. If I was going to do this properly, I'd need to organize my research, create a system, build a reference guide for others who might come after me. Because I was a librarian, and librarians didn't hoard information. We shared it. The cursor blinked on the empty page, waiting. I began to type. Location 1, Columbus. Status, complete. 9 souls freed. Collection destroyed. Collector integrated into Foundation. Location 2, Elmwood Memorial Branch, Marion County. Status, in progress. Estimated completion, November 2024. My watch read 11:47 p.m. Outside my apartment window, Columbus slept. But somewhere in Indiana, in 46 other libraries, children waited in phantom sections for someone to remember their names. I had work to do, and this time, I knew exactly which rules to break.